Welcome to Author Life Podcast, where myself and guest authors share their stories, offer tips and advice, and share our writing, publishing, and marketing knowledge. I'm your host, Delcherie Gladden. Welcome back to the podcast. I know it's been a while since I've been able to post anything. I apologize about that, but I am going to try to do better and be getting some more episodes out for everybody. Today, what I wanted to talk about was book buying and kind of some tips for authors on working with a book buyer if you're trying to get your books into a brick and mortar store. And the reason this topic came up is I was at a writing conference last month, and a local book buyer was one of the speakers, and so she kind of gave us some insights on how she chooses books and kind of how she works with authors, and I thought that they were really great, and I wanted to pass those on. Just for some background, the book buyer, Jeannie Costello, she is a book buyer for a local bookstore called Maria's Bookshop in Durango, Colorado, and it's a small bookstore. I believe she said they carry about 10,000 titles. I think so. Yeah, they carry about 10,000 titles in their shop, which is a good number, but not in comparison to like your average Barnes and Noble that you're going to walk into in a bigger city. We don't have any big bookstores where I live, so Maria's is kind of the biggest bookstore here, especially since Hastings is closing down. But just to kind of give you a frame of reference, some of her numbers are going to be different if you were talking to a major bookstore, that's carrying, 40,000 titles. They may have some different numbers there. But a lot of authors who are trying to get their books into bookstores will first start out with some smaller bookshops like Maria's. And so I thought these tips and some of her numbers would be helpful to a lot of authors trying to get into bookstores. So to start off with, one of the things she mentioned was that on average, there are 40 to 50,000 new books put out by traditional publishers per year. So that is just the traditional publishers, the big five and their imprints. So that's not taking into account all of the indie books that are put out and self-published. Now, of those 40 to 50,000 traditionally published books that are put out, when she gets catalogs from these big publishers, she seriously considers about 600 titles. So for a shop that is carrying about 10,000 titles each year, she may add around 600 new titles. And then, an equal number are then retired that they no longer carry ones that aren't selling well. So just to give you kind of a frame of reference there, out of the 10,000 books that they carry at Maria's, 2/3 of those are older books. So books that have been out for several years, that have been shown to sell regularly. That's going to be the bulk of their inventory, which leaves them with about 5,000 new titles that they'll try throughout the year. And if they don't sell well, they send them back. They don't reorder. If they do sell, then they'll keep those on and continue to have them as inventory in the store. Now, of the 5,000 new titles that they'll try out during the year, she said that 25 to 30% of those titles are returned to the publisher with 0 sales. So that's a decent number of books that they order into the store, they keep on the shelves, and they never sell a single copy. And I think most bookstores will keep books for about a year. I know that was what Hastings told us. when we did a signing there, myself and a couple of friends. Smaller bookstores may do less, so they may be more around like 6 months before they will return books to the publisher. And she said even of those books that do sell, most of the remaining 70 to 75% of the books that they don't send back to the publisher, they sell one copy. The ones that do fairly well, they're selling 2 to 3 copies. Now, this is not taking into account, something like The Girl on the Train comes out and they order 25 copies and they sell all of them. Those are kind of outliers. Most of the information that she was giving during her presentation were on your average book in the bookstore, not these, occasional outliers that just kind of go bananas when they get released. So kind of put those ones aside and consider your average book coming out, and those would be the numbers. So most books that she would consider as doing well sell 1 to 3 copies per year. And now the next thing she talked about was considering how people discover books. And these are things that they've observed in their store, working with their customers and kind of observing how they choose their books. And so some of this is kind of specific to the Durango community, but a lot of the things she mentioned, I think, can be fairly well generalized to the majority of readers. So to give you an idea of kind of her readership in their bookstore, they sell a lot of literary fiction, which I think that's probably pretty accurate for most bookstores as well. That's a good chunk of a lot of bookstores' inventory these days. They also sell a lot of travel and outdoors books because they are Durango, Colorado, right in the middle of the mountains with tons of hiking, biking, water sport, all kinds of stuff. So that makes sense that they would have a big inventory of travel and outdoor. And along with that, they have a lot of books that they keep and sell on the natural sciences and nature topics and things like that, healthy living, that sort of thing. And the last one she mentioned was that lately they've had a lot of interest in books talking about how to unplug, retreat from technology and society a little bit, and tips on de-stressing and finding some peace and calm in their lives. And that is probably something that, even though that might be a little bit more specific to Durango, that is probably fairly worldwide as well. I think everybody has a lot of stress lately, so that's not surprising. Now, when it comes to fiction, she said that your representation matters a lot, and that is talking about the buyer and the reader and how those exchanges go. I think I'll cover it a little bit more later, but she did talk about how important it is that the reader be able to find books easily and that they are accurately described and represented, and that the author trying to get their books onto the shelves does need to take that into account and make sure that they are pushing their product accurately. And I believe we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. One of the things that she talked about quite a bit was, unsurprisingly, cover art. And she had several tips that you hear all the time when it comes to cover art, but then she also had a couple of others that I think aren't brought up as much, and it was really good that she mentioned them. So I'm going to go through some of her tips on cover art. She said it needs to speak to the person who will love your book. And she used an example of one book that an author brought in that they were wanting to have stocked in the store. and she's describing the book and telling Jeannie kind of how or what the book's about to give her an idea. And when Jeannie looked at the cover, she was like, why is there, like a picture of a little boy? That's not what you described to me. I'm not sure what the cover has to do with your story. And the author said, well, once they read the book, they'll understand. It's a painting. I think it was a historical fiction. She's like, once they read the book, they'll understand what the cover means. And Jeannie was kind of like, that's not really how it works. Because she was very nice, but she told the author, if I put this up on the shelf and a reader comes in looking for like a historical fiction, I think kind of the West, and they come in looking for that type of book, she said they're not going to pick yours up because the cover does not communicate to them that your book is a historical Western narrative. And I really appreciated that she mentioned that, because doing cover design myself, I'll sometimes help other people with theirs. And I pay attention to cover art quite a bit. And I have seen this so many times where you look at the cover art and you're just like, I have no clue what this book is supposed to be about. It's either too vague or just weird, or, you're just like, I'm not sure what they're going for here. And readers are going to pass it by, because if they don't get a strong impression of what the book is about just based off the cover, it's not going to keep their interest enough that they're going to want to learn more. So definitely you want to make sure the cover represents the type of book you have, so that people who are looking for that type of book immediately can look at yours and say, yes, that's what I'm looking for. So really great tip that she mentioned there. She also said, think of your cover art as a marketing tool. When you look at print advertisements or ads that come up on the internet or Facebook or whatever, take a minute and look at those for the graphic nature of them. And look at how things are arranged, the colors that they use, the fonts that they use. For the majority of ads that you see, every single aspect of that has been very carefully considered and picked in order to make sure that it's having the biggest impact. And that is something that I think a lot of the time with book covers, especially if it's not done by someone who is specifically experienced in designing book covers, they don't always take all of those factors into consideration. And it really needs to be, because your book cover is your biggest marketing tool in trying to sell your book. So the next thing she mentioned was that your cover art can't just be an extension of your art as far as your writing. So you're like, I have this vision of what I want this book cover to look like, and it's kind of an extension of what you're feeling, what you're thinking as you're writing your book. Sometimes that can work, but if it's not communicating to your reader what it needs to in order for them to pick it up, that doesn't always work. So sometimes you as the author, you have this like great image in mind. And if you're working with a cover designer, and if they are trying to talk to you and tell you like, I don't know that that's going to work, I think maybe something else would be better. If they're experienced and they have the knowledge and the tools to help you design the right cover, please do try to, consider what they're telling you and listen to their advice. Because sometimes as the author, you just get this really great idea or this image in your head, and that's what you want. And that's not necessarily what's going to sell your book. So take that into account. And the other thing is that your book cover really needs to indicate as clearly as possible why a reader should want to read your book. And that does go back to communicating the right genre and theme, but also the right interest. Because kind of back to that earlier example, if you're writing historical Western fiction and you have an image that definitely portrays that, you've got kind of the Western setting, maybe period clothing, so people immediately know what genre you're writing in. If there's still nothing about the image that creates any interest or gives you an idea of the conflict or the plot, it still may be falling short. So you need to have the correct genre and theme in your book cover, but you also need to be able to communicate interest, either through conflict or romance or what have you, whatever you're going for. You need both of those for your cover to be really effective. She kind of talked about using your book cover as a shortcut to tell your reader what it's about. And I thought that was a really great way of looking at it, that if you can step back from the story, you wrote it, and if you can look at the book cover and say, yes, someone could look at this book cover and in 2 or 3 sentences communicate what they think the book is about, and they're accurate, then you really have a good book cover there. If you show it to somebody and they're kind of like, I don't, maybe this, let me think, then you might need to go back to the drawing board and kind of do some redesign work there. Now, let's move on from book covers. The next thing that she talked about was destination and discovery. Now, when it comes to destination, she is talking about kind of where you are wanting your book to end up. And so you need to, first of all, have your particular book in mind, and you need to know the specific topic and the need and where you are expecting this book to go. Because if you come to the book buyer and you're like, well, it might be kind of contemporary, but also sort of paranormal, but maybe it could go over in the literary side, that's not going to help them, because they're thinking, well, if you can't direct readers to your book based on the genre or the theme, how am I supposed to do it? So that makes it hard for them, and they're going to be a little bit more leery of accepting your book and putting it on the shelf. So have everything really worked out before you go and approach the book buyer. Know where you want the destination for your book to be. She also mentioned that you need to be having critical conversations about your story to create interest. And she had mentioned that if she has a reader come in and ask for a particular book, she is going to make sure that she has that book available for them, whether she has to special order or stock it. And so if you are working to create buzz about your book and people are coming into a bookshop and asking, hey, do you have this book in stock? Where can I get this book? And then you as the author come in and say, hey, I have this book. I'd really like to talk to you about stocking it in your bookstore. And if the book buyer is then like, oh, I've had a couple people ask me for this already. Yeah, let's talk. I think that would be great. That is going to help you get your foot in the door so much. So definitely be talking about your book, creating that critical interest. Now, with discovery, that is something that authors work at every single day. It's one of the biggest challenges of writing, is how to get your book in readers' hands, how to have it be discovered by people. There are so many books out there. And like I mentioned at the beginning, 40 to 50,000 new books every year just from traditional publishers. So make sure that, again, your cover speaks to the reader, and pay attention to conventions for your genre. So a lot of Westerns, you do need to have, indication that is Western, that you're using the right period clothing on the book cover, you're using the right dialogue in the book, and the settings are accurate, different things like that. If it's something really out there, or kind of a mishmash of genres, which is a little bit more popular now, all of those things can work, but they're going to be a little bit harder to pitch to bookstores if it's something that they're really not sure what they're getting into. So do pay attention to genres and their conventions, and you definitely don't want to be just writing stereotypical type of books, trying to get them into bookstores. But if it's kind of unique or out there a little bit, be really prepared to explain how your book is unique and why it's still going to appeal to writers, so that they know, okay, maybe this doesn't fall into the normal conventions for this genre, but the author really seems to know what they're talking about and has a good grasp on where this book should go and who's going to read it. And that will help you if your book is a little bit more kind of unique than what they're traditionally looking for. So again, know where your book would be placed on the shelves. Have a specific genre and area of the bookstore that you expect your book to be placed. And know where people who will love your book are going to go to look for it. So even if you would consider your book more of a contemporary romance, if readers have told you that they would classify it more in women's fiction, that's what you want to pitch to the bookstore. Because if your readers are going to a certain area to find your book, that's where your book needs to be, regardless of whether that's your exact genre pick for it or not. Get your book where readers are going to be looking for it. Now, when it comes to approaching bookstores, one of the things that Jeannie mentioned was that you need to know what your ambitions are. Like I mentioned, Maria's bookstore is, not a tiny bookstore. I would say, I guess, kind of mid-size for an indie bookstore. So if that's what you're looking for, that's great. If you're going after like Barnes and Nobles, or, depending on what the big bookstore is in your area, know what your ambitions are, and know kind of what that's going to entail and what your expectations are as far as sales as well. If booksellers love your book, it's a great way to make inroads into getting more exposure. So if you can start small, and then you can have numbers and you can have statistics and say, hey, I've got my book stocked here. I'm selling X amount of copies in a small bookstore. Book buyer so-and-so, we've been working together. They can recommend my book. And now you're trying to step up to a larger bookstore. That can be a really great way because a lot of booksellers are in contact and they know each other in certain areas, and that can be really helpful to you. So don't pass off the smaller bookstores, even if your end ambition is to be in a large chain bookstore. Having a book on the shelves alone is not going to help you reach critical mass goals. So if your ambition is to sell 1 million copies of your book, having your book on the shelves in a small to mid-sized bookstore is good for exposure, but that is probably not going to help you reach your goal of selling 1 million books. Just because there is a limited number of people who are going to go through that bookstore per year, and only a fraction of those people who are looking for your particular genre. So know your ambitions and then know the realistic expectations of each step and kind of where you need to go in order to reach those ambitions, and understanding that it takes time and often it's going to take multiple steps to do that. Now, something that she talked about as well was a book buyer working with self-published authors. Because it's not just self-published authors who are having to contact book buyers directly. A lot of smaller independent authors who are with small to mid-sized publishers also are, having to do this themselves. And even some with big six publishers, if they're not being pushed by their publisher, they're out there talking to book buyers themselves as well. So you have a wide variety of authors who are doing this, but she did have some tips specifically for self-published authors because some of the complications are a little bit different with self-pub authors than with traditionally published authors. So if you are a self-published author and you are getting ready to approach a book buyer about stocking your book in their store, these were the things that she said would help. Know what your book buyer needs to know. They need to know how to buy your book and how to reorder. Now, if the only way for a book buyer to order your book is directly from the author, that is extremely tough on the book buyer. Because then she has to keep track of individual books and their inventory and call you and set up a time and do an individual contract and purchase order. And it has to be done separate from all of her other reorders. And that is a lot of extra time for one or two books. And they're very busy. So that makes it difficult. You're going to have a much harder time getting into brick and mortar stores if you are having to directly do the ordering and purchasing with you and the book buyer on a personal basis. So, just logistically and realistically, that's just how it is. And so if they turn you down, it's probably a lot to do with that and less to do with the quality of your book. It ends up being a really big hassle for them, unfortunately. Also, your books need to be returnable. That is a big thing for bookstores. When they order from like Ingram, they get a deal where they can purchase the books more cheaply, and then if they don't sell after a period of time, they can send them back to the publisher. That creates a very low risk situation for bookstores. And whereas if they are having to purchase books from you or from a smaller publisher that are not very, very well discounted and they are non-returnable, that is a much bigger risk for them. And so you as the author need to understand that. And with some self-published authors, it's just not possible for your book to be returnable. Just the printers you're using, it doesn't work. And, that just may not be an avenue you want to go down then. But even for small publishers, like the publisher I'm with right now for some of my books, they are not returnable books either, because of the printer that they use. So it's just something to be aware of. Know whether your book is returnable or not, and what the discount is if they order through the printer or publisher, and what you're going to give them, even if you're a self-published author and they're willing to work with you. What price are you going to sell to them, or are you going on a consignment basis where they don't have to put any money up front? They're just going to stock the book and then split the difference when they sell. So kind of know what those options are. Some smaller bookstores are willing to work on consignment. Hastings used to be before they went bankrupt, and now they're all closing. So that was always a nice way to work with Hastings. But less and less bookstores are willing to do that because it's a big hassle. So you want your books to be as easy to work with as possible. if your goal is to get them into brick and mortar stores. And that means being returnable and being able to be ordered at a steep discount directly from the printer or publisher. Now, the next thing she talked about was book sales and kind of what some trends are in publishing in general. So she mentioned book sales are up the last few years, but not proportionally to the number of books being published. So the market is continuing to be flooded with new books, which is great because there are more options available and there are so many more avenues for publishing now than they used to be, but it's getting harder to be discovered. And that's just how it goes. It's kind of evening out a little bit more over the years, but just be aware of kind of what the trends are right now. She did discuss Amazon a little bit, and so I'll just kind of mention some of the things she said. Amazon doesn't sell books to make money. They sell most of their books at cost in order to get customers for other more profitable products. So a lot of the ebooks and the Amazon publishers that they have their own imprints now that they're selling books. The way she kind of saw it and explained it was that they're using a lot of the ebooks and their own books as a marketing tool to draw readers in. To draw customers in so that you're on there looking at books and then it's like, oh yeah, I need to order a new crock pot or lamp or whatever. Amazon controls the majority of the ebook market right now. I believe around 70% of ebooks are sold through Amazon. And they have some really great options. But just remember that Amazon is still a company. They are not a publisher. So that does create kind of some interesting conflicts there at times. Indie bookstores are more relevant the last few years. There was talk for a while, all the indie books are dying. They're all going to disappear. We're never going to see them again. And they're actually making a resurgence, which is awesome. I wish we had one here where I live. Maybe at some point we will. And they kind of the last 5 years, we've been seeing more indie bookstores popping up. They're getting a little bit more of the market share. Still only 6 to 7% of total books that are sold go toward indie bookstores, but that is up, so that's awesome. And a lot of that is because they work really well with their community and they are good at creating buzz in the community and getting people into their bookstores. They've really worked hard at kind of becoming like the neighborhood bookstore and gaining that loyalty from readers. So again, kind of don't pass up the indie bookstores just because they're not Barnes & Noble or what have you. Keep them on your radar. Paperback book sales are also up, which is great. Everybody, I think, still loves paperback books. Even if you don't always read your paperback copy, it's still nice to have one and you can smell it because books just have this particular smell. Paperbacks are not going to disappear. Some authors don't produce paperbacks at all. They just focus on ebooks, and that's fine. But just keep that in mind. Paperback sales are increasing, and they're not dead. They're not dying out. I think paperback books will always be around. Whereas ebooks, where they were kind of just skyrocketing in sales for a while, they have plateaued somewhat and are kind of heading at a more steady sales rate, which is to be expected. They're kind of leveling off. They're not the new technology anymore. And, just kind of, again, being aware of some of those trends in ebooks and paperback books as well, and the validity of indie bookstores as well as the more big chain stores that are out there, which there are fewer and fewer of those also. So those were kind of the tips and suggestions that Jeannie had as far as working with a book buyer, how to make that a little bit more successful. And if that's your goal, to get your book into bookstores, hopefully some of those tips have helped you and will get you better prepared to go in and talk to a book buyer. So I will be back soon with another episode. I promise not to wait months and months. I'll have some new topics up in the next few weeks for everybody. So thanks again for listening in. Thanks again for listening to Author Life Podcast. For more information on the podcast or guest authors, check out the links in the show description. If there's a topic you'd like to learn more about, find me online and send me suggestions anytime.